of Ukrainian victory, Russian accountability, and the defense of the international rules-based order. Compare it to the language of European leaders who still talk about territorial integrity, war crimes, tribunals, and the impossibility of rewarding aggression. What Vance said at that rally in North Carolina was a different foreign policy vocabulary entirely. It was transactional, it was blunt, and it was, I believe, deliberate. Here's why I say that. When the Vice President of the United States makes a foreign policy statement at a public rally, not in a classified briefing, not in a diplomatic cable, but in front of cameras and voters, he is not accidentally revealing policy. He is communicating it to the American public, who he wants to prepare for what's coming, and to Russia, which watches everything. The word commerce is doing enormous work in that sentence. Not security, not justice, not Ukrainian territorial integrity. Commerce. That tells you what this administration values most in this equation. It tells you how they are framing the war, not as a moral contest between democracy and authoritarianism, but as a disruption to economic relationships that they want to restore. When you pair that framing with the Florida meetings, with Dmitriev sitting across from Kushner and Witkoff, talking about investment projects worth trillions of dollars, you start to see a coherent strategy. The goal is not Ukrainian victory. The goal is a negotiated settlement that ends the fighting and opens the door to economic normalization. Washington, in short, is trying to close this war. And then came the move that made governments across Europe genuinely alarmed. On March 13th, just 2 days ago, the Trump administration issued a 30-day waiver allowing countries to purchase sanctioned Russian oil and petroleum products currently stranded at sea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced it, and when pressed on whether this was just the beginning, he said, and this is important, "We may unsanction other Russian oil. There are hundreds of millions of barrels of sanctioned crude on the water, and by unsanctioning them, Treasury can create supply." And Trump himself, speaking publicly, said, "We have sanctions on some countries. We're going to take those sanctions off till this straightens out. Then, who knows? Maybe we won't have to put them on. There will be so much peace." To understand why this is significant, you have to understand what energy sanctions actually meant. When the West sanctioned Russian oil in 2022, it was the single most powerful economic weapon in the coalition's arsenal. Oil is Russia's fiscal foundation. It's the revenue that funds the state, and by extension, the war machine. By threatening secondary sanctions against any company or country that bought Russian energy, the West was trying to strangle Moscow's ability to keep fighting. It worked, at least partially. Russia ended last year with an 18% year-on-year drop in crude oil revenues. The pressure was real, and now Washington has begun to lift it. The European reaction was swift and sharp. European Council President Antonio Costa said the move was very concerning because it impacts European security. Zelensky, standing alongside Macron in Paris, said that even this single easing could hand Russia roughly $10 billion for its war effort. Britain, Germany, France, Norway. One by one, they pledged to maintain their own sanctions. But here is the geopolitical truth that no European leader wants to say out loud. European sanctions without American enforcement are fundamentally weakened. The power of the Western sanctions architecture came from dollar primacy, from the fact that any bank or business anywhere in the world that helped Russia could be cut off from the US financial system. That threat has just been partially withdrawn, and everyone in Moscow knows it. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said US and Russian interests coincide on stabilizing energy markets. Putin said Russia was ready to resume fossil fuel exports to Europe, free from political pressures. And Dmitriev, the man who has been sitting in Florida, meeting rooms with the Trump team, posted the Russian flag on social media and wrote, "Buy Russian oil and gas to maintain a balanced energy supply." The Kremlin did not react with quiet satisfaction. They reacted with open celebration, because they understood exactly what the signal meant. Now, context matters here. The United States and Israel had just launched military strikes on Iran, which effectively disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, the channel through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil flows. Prices spiked past $100 a barrel. Trump publicly stated he wanted to see prices at $40. Sanctions relief on Russian oil was framed as a supply solution to an energy crisis. But watch the language Trump used. "Maybe we won't have to put them on. There'll be so much peace." That phrase connects the dots. He is explicitly linking sanctions relief to the possibility of peace. He is saying the road to ending the Ukraine war runs through economic normalization. Start normalizing the economics, and the political settlement follows. Whether that logic holds, we'll get to that. But first, let's step back and ask the most fundamental question. How did we get here?